Paddington Bear, Blue, here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Well, Saturday was National Train Day. Usually you go to a train station to get somewhere. Well, I took Amtrak down to Philadelphia to stay in the 30th Street station because it was hosting an event honoring the Pullman porters, the African-American men who worked long hours as attendants on the luxurious sleeper trains operated by the Pullman Company from 1868 to 1969. The first porters George Pullman hired after the Civil War were former slaves. In the 20s, over 20,000 African Americans worked for the Pullman Company, making it one of the largest employers of African American men. Today, there are about 40 surviving Pullman porters, 4 of whom were at the event in 30th Street Station in Philadelphia Saturday. The Pullman porters played an important but unsung role in the history of this country. In 1925, they formed the first black labor union under the stewardship of A. Philip Randolph, called the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. They helped pave the way for the civil rights movement, are also credited with building the black middle class in this country. Today, we bring you excerpts of a documentary about the legacy of the Pullman porters. It's based on the book by journalist Larry Tye called Rising from the Rails, the Story of the Pullman Porter. This excerpt begins with Dr. Juliet E.K. Walker, professor of history at University of Texas, Austin.
They were regarded as the consummate invisible man. In fact, many porters were called George.
The lady who got on the train in Chicago, every time I'd serve her, she would call me George. George, bring me a scotch and soda.
George was a term that referred to George Pullman, who had begun the Pullman Company and hired the Pullman porters and what have you. And it was a term that was very much hated by the black workers, whether they were waiters or Pullman porters. They despised that term.
The club car is filled with dignitaries, multimillionaires. President of Universal Steel was one of them on the car at that time. And so she continued to call me George. I always served her. Now, I could not talk to her. I could not rebuff her in any way, but I could talk to Mr. Hale, and she got the message. I said, well, Mr. Hale, my name is not George, but even though we live in America, the best country in the world, where liberal education is available to everybody, yet there are still so many people who are so endowed with such dire traits of morbid scrupulosity that they allow ignorance to supersede intelligence. She got the message, paid her bill, and got out. And the whole club car went up in uproars, congratulating me for the delicate way I answered her question.
My father said, if you want somebody to call George, you better go make yourself a baby and name him George, so you'll have somebody to call George, because that's not my name. And he actually had to go before management about the incident. And it was after that the railroad began using name tags for the waiters and the porters to tell what their names really was, so that they wouldn't have to be referred to as George.
They just say, George, will you bring me or get me a glass of water or drink or something like that? But didn't cause no confusion, nothing like that. I didn't pay no attention.
And this gentleman sat on my station, and we waiters have a badge with our names on the badge. So he looked up at me and said, Jimmy, you look just like a nigger I met in Cincinnati. Are you that nigger? I said, no, sir, I'm not that nigger. How can I serve you? I always will remember he ordered steak. That was the most expensive meal on the B&O at that time. It cost $1.50. I said, I'll serve you. He said, you look like a nice nigger. He said, here, take $10. I said, no, sir, I won't take your $10. I'll wait on you. I will not take your $10 because I will not allow you to buy my integrity for $10.
The Pullman porters recognized the extent to which they were being exploited, but those who complained would be fired.
A lot of men got fired fighting and trying to defend yourself. You can't defend yourself.
While there was interest in the need for a labor union, many of the Pullman porters were concerned to support this openly. They needed someone.
Some of the luggage porters are required to handle is heavy and cumbersome. When lifting heavy objects, use your leg muscles instead of your back muscles. Injuries not only reduce your earning capacity, but are painful as well.
This low salary, the long hours, the idea that if they broke any one of the hundreds of George Pullman's rules in his rule book, that they could be fired, this led them repeatedly to try to unionize, and George Pullman and his successor Robert Todd Lincoln repeatedly crushed them. The porters were so discouraged, they went to a man who had never been a Pullman porter and decided to hire him to run their union. This guy had a track record of abject failure. He had tried 4 times to organize unions, and each time he had failed. He was an avowed socialist. He was everything that you would think would guarantee failure. He was a man named A. Philip Randolph. He spent 12 long years battling to organize a union. He watched his top lieutenants be fired. They tried bribery, intimidation, and this guy, nobody quite understood how persistent he was and how much the porters had faith in him.
Randolph was really having very little success until he got the ear of Franklin Roosevelt. And Roosevelt really became enamored of Randolph. He thought very highly of him.
It was this oratorical skill he had, his ability to negotiate with organized labor.
Everybody knows about the famous March on Washington in 1963. That was a march where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. What people may not know is that the original March on Washington was scheduled 22 years before, and it was organized by A. Philip Randolph, and Randolph called it off because Franklin Roosevelt agreed to pass the Fair Employment Practices Act.
Roosevelt backed him, and with that backing, he essentially forced the Pullman Company to capitulate and recognize the union.
12 long years to the day that he started his drive to organize a union, the Pullman Company came in, they shocked him, they shocked everybody around this long negotiating table by saying, "We give up, we will sign." And it was the first ever trade union for African Americans in America.
In 1937, the union won recognition. This was something. Black workers who were able to improve their condition because they had a union to speak for them.
Dad always talked about A. Philip Randolph, like the man was a saint, a god almost, and how he revered him and what he did for the Pullman porters.
I met Mr. Randolph on 7th Avenue. I got a chance to shake hands with him for what he was trying to do for the porters.
The Pullman porter would have never